As you probably already know by now, there has been a split between UDisc and the PDGA. Let's go over what this means and if this could spell a very bad trend for the PDGA and live scoring in general. So yesterday, UDisc came out with a press release stating that they'll no longer do live scoring for the Pro Tour. They have actually been with them since 2016, which is kind of crazy because it still kind of feels like UDisc is like a kind of new thing. They went on to state that they actually had throw-by-throw scoring since 2017. So that's where like you can track if a player's on like their third throw, if they're about to putt for circle 1, circle 2. And they were also in charge of the world rankings, strokes gained, and a bunch of advanced metrics, with probably the most popular one being the win percentage. And basically stated that their only presence on the Pro Tour right now will be using all of their data as a historical reference point, because as of right now, the only live scoring that will be going on is by the PDGA and Mando. Now, I'm not fully understanding how this partnership even came about, because I really do think Mando is a great site, a great reference point, but from what I can see and what I've kind of gleaned from the site, it's just data. It is just data with a little bit of analysis put on top of it. Whereas I feel like UDisc Live had very high level stats that you really cannot get by just totaling a row in a table. Like there's a lot more advanced stuff going on. So the partnership doesn't totally make sense there. And what I found probably the most entertaining is that in the UDisc press release, they did kind of throw shade all over this announcement, being like, we want to thank everyone so much for being able to provide high quality stats. And we want to thank all of our fans for our high quality stats, because you just know that the future of disc golf will not look the same way as it did before. We're going to lose this. It is just inevitable. And it really makes me wonder, how could this not have been a great opportunity for the Pro Tour to buy out UDisc? I am sure they are a very expensive product, but they feel so intertwined with the Pro Tour that I feel like losing them will be a very big hit to the 2024 season. But what's even worse is that not only are we losing that, we get to see a little bit more of where their head's at with the PDGA, and that is because they stated that they'll be using all of this data to license and sell it to third-party platforms such as fantasy sites and, of course, gambling. So it really makes sense why they made this decision. It was purely money focused, presumably, which makes sense. You have to run a business in a cost-effective way, but it really seems to rub people the wrong way. You're really going after losing features in exchange for making more money from online gambling. And I'm really not understanding how they couldn't have just used the UDisc data and licensed it to third parties and they just pay UDisc like a certain amount. I'm not really understanding why they couldn't have done this together, but it definitely seems like the PDGA is trying to lighten the cost load by just using the PDGA Live site and in some kind of unknown way also Mando. And just looking at the partners for 2023 for UDisc, it is insane. They basically had every single name brand out there that they were partners with. And I'm not fully understanding what kind of partnership they'll have in 2024, because it seems like a lot of the partners were through the Pro Tour. So if you lose the Pro Tour, do you lose a lot of those? But this definitely makes sense as to why they raised their prices to $30, because presumably that meant that they had 50% of the revenue coming from the Pro Tour partnership. And it was probably a very tough decision to actually make people pay double the price after just raising the price like a couple years ago. But just because PDGA has probably made a pretty big misstep, that does not mean that UDisc has also not made some mistakes along the way. At least from my perspective, I do think UDisc is treating their company as kind of like a startup, trying to get as many employees, as much tech, as much features as they can possibly get onto the app that they deem high quality features. And while this probably does seem good, I think this falls under the same issue that many month-to-month subscription services fall into, where for many people, you're giving the same exact product month after month, year after year, and not ultimately getting a better experience. Now, that is not to say that UDisc is not doing anything right. I think they have a great amount of features that if you are a very intense power user, this $30 a month is totally worth it. Hands down, I do not want to understate that their power users get so much value out of those $30. But for so many of us, we just use it as like an app to track our rounds every once in a while, and it's not super critical, but it seems like the position that UDisc is trying to kind of put themselves in is like the do everything app. They are trying to build out an expansive list of features with a ton of bells and whistles. They're doubling their prices. They have about 23 employees. It seems like they have a very well-staffed dev team with a bunch of well-experienced devs, and I actually know the CTO pretty well. I've worked with him a couple years back, and I think he was probably one of the most intelligent developers I've ever worked with, and I've listened to interviews with the co-founders of UDisc, and just the whole team seems very, very intelligent. For so many of us, these constant features that they release are just not getting used, not even getting like opened. Like there's so many features that I talk to people about and they're like, oh, UDisc does that? Oh, cool. And then they just never use it. And if you are putting so much time and effort and money into all this development effort, server costs, you really have to start questioning, is it worth it? Because it truly may not be sustainable for where the future of the sport is going. Because yes, there may be like a million happy users of this app, but how many of those are willing to pay $30 a year? Especially when it seems like a lot of the features that I use on a day-to-day basis are a free feature. And honestly, the biggest use I was using it for during the pro season was just tracking scores and trying to see like, oh yeah, how is KJ doing today? I used that way more than I ever used the actual UDisc. So even though that is just purely anecdotal evidence, I feel like the value was so much more rooted in basic stats and seeing live scoring. So if we can get basic stats for free and we have no live scoring, then UDisc also has to make a big pivot, which might include layoffs, might include simplifying their dev stack, and ultimately there might be a case where the PDGA is just like, you know what, UDisc, we do actually want you, but we can only pay this amount for you. Maybe they do get bought out, but for a much lower price than what UDisc needs or wants, so they have to lay people off, which is just such a bad look for the sport. And then there's also the unintended consequence of so many volunteers and players have used UDisc for so many years that using the PDGA live site will just almost certainly produce more errors and more bad scoring, at least for the start of the season. But also another thing to know about UDisc is that so many course ambassadors were doing all this volunteer work that was probably a lot of effort, all for free with no true upside other than just helping out players. So if they have to pay double the price and no real benefit, then it certainly seems like a bad look for UDisc where they're trying to profit off the goodwill of all these volunteers. So overall, I just cannot see this as being a good thing for the sport, and I really wish that the PDGA and the Pro Tour kind of would have restructured this a different way, because it just does not feel like a good thing for anybody. But with that said, my next video, I've been thinking about it so much and I'm excited this is actually going to happen. My next video is actually going to be, can I make UDisc in 24 hours? I'll try to make the live version 24 hours, and then can I make UDisc in 24 hours? I think it's going to be very fun and very intriguing to see what can I actually do as a kind of experienced developer and trying to prove to myself how hard are these features really, because I know there's so much dev effort that goes into UDisc, but to me it still feels like it's just a basic app, at least for the majority of use cases. So I'd like to see what I can do in 24 hours, so be sure to be on the lookout for that. I'm very excited. But with that, what do you guys think about all this? I would love to know. Thank you so much for watching. Wild Runs, signing out. Peace.